Matt. So hi, everybody. My name's Dave Kiff. I'm with the City of Healdsburg, and this is our community Zoom about streets that could be opened fully or partially to pedestrians or storefront uses or restaurant sit-down uses and things like that. Because we have a pretty good group of people, we have about 30, what I'd ask you to do was two things. Please stay on mute if you're not talking. And then secondly, you have a couple of ways of asking questions. One is to raise your blue hand under the participant button. We're all pretty familiar with Zoom, but you know how that works. You could click on that and we'll call on you to ask a question. The other way is in the chat section. That works really well. Just to type in your question, and Mark or I will go through each one of those by the time we're done. So we're going to go through a brief presentation with you. Mark will do some additional introductions, and then we just kind of open it up to the floor. So I'm going to hand it over to Mark.
All right, thanks, Dave. Welcome, and thanks for joining us today on our second community Zoom. I will be taking some of your computer screen to show you a presentation. There are a lot of images in here that we'll go through relatively quickly. And we will upload this presentation if it's not up on the city's website yet. Looks like it's already there. So you can definitely go back and review the information that we talked about today and also get additional comments to Matt Mildy, who's really helping us to coordinate all the behind the scenes work. So, and his contact information will follow at the end. So I'm going to take over part of your screen right now. And again, remember, you can, as we go through this, feel free to use the chat feature and send questions to everyone, and we'll be reading those, especially for folks who are not able to join by video. All right, just one second. I'm going to got to reconfigure my screen here. There we go. Okay, so first of all, welcome. We have branded this program Marketspace. The original focus of the program was really to look at how to use the public realm, use public spaces to enhance businesses and give them additional tools so they could be successful as the restrictions are loosened, and give them space where they can actually function to meet the social distancing and physical distancing requirements. There is also an interest of doing things that are on a larger scale throughout the city, and we'll talk a little bit about that. We haven't dove too deep into that area yet, but we know that's something of interest to the community as a whole as well. So again, Marketspace, opening public spaces, the implementation of sidewalks, parking spaces, parks, and streets for businesses. There's a team of the city who is working on this, led by Dave Kiff, the interim assistant city manager, Larry Zimmer from Public Works from a safety perspective and traffic management side of things, Dave Jans from our recreation team, Matt Mildy, who does facilities and events and has a lot of knowledge, Dave and Matt both, in terms of doing street closures and what it takes and how they work and how they impact the businesses. And then I'm serving kind of as a facilitating role. So our goals at Marketspace initially are to prepare for a more business-friendly phase. Really our goal is to share ideas and information. We've had a number of these Zooms with businesses in town, not just in the downtown core, but throughout the entire community. We're trying to listen and get ideas and then evaluate those and implement those as soon and as quickly as we can, because we know businesses need to move ahead in getting back in operation. There are a number of considerations that have gone into the program. The first and probably the foremost are the health orders that the county health officer is issuing and relaxing over time. So that comes kind of as our overall guide. Second, and equally important, is safety. Not only safety of customers, but safety of business staff as well, ensuring that what we do doesn't jeopardize the safety of our community and our businesses. There are zoning and there are different regulations that come into play. The feasibility of implementing something, it may sound great on paper and it may look super cool, but it's simply not feasible because logistically it doesn't work, it might be too costly, just a number of considerations that go into feasibility and cost. So what options have we proposed? I would like to say that we propose everything that we can think of from a public realm standpoint. Streets, sidewalks, alleyways, on-street parking, parking lots, parks, including the plaza and West Plaza, a roundabout, off-site facilities like Villa Chanticleer, and then other ideas. If there are other things that businesses brought up, like they've talked about, they may have a private parking lot adjacent to their business. Well, this program allows them, with their property owner's permission, to expand into those private areas as well. So it started originally with public realm, and then we also enhanced it to include private facilities as long as they have permission of those property owners. So the program is right now in 2 phases, and I'll talk about phase 1 first, which is the use of sidewalks and street parking. And you'll see throughout town, some of this is already in place, and I've got some images to show you of that. This was actually approved by City Council on June 1st, and it involves opening up our sidewalks to businesses. The top right, you can kind of see like people have brought their wares out into the public realm, making it more accessible. The 3 on the left and at the bottom are utilizing parking spaces, for example, for dining to expand where they need that physical distancing. There's a really cool program that's called Parking Days that's done throughout the nation in September, and we had actually planned to launch that. It's a one day, it's a special event type of thing where businesses can occupy those parking spaces for that day and do some creative things to really bring their business out into the community. These are fairly traditional kinds of setups. You've got a table and chair, small railings, some traffic barriers. Some of the activities that happen on parking days are very artistically focused. They're very creative. And so what we're trying to do is give businesses different ideas on how they don't have to expend a lot of dollars to make their business space enhanced. It can be relatively simple, it can be more complex. It's really up to those businesses to decide that. So the phase 1 of this was launched on June 4th. So City Council approved it June 1st. We were able to launch it on June 4th, just a couple days later. It is under cityofhealdsburg.org Marketspace. It is a temporary outdoors activity permit. There is no charge for this. It's a simple 2-page form, plus some additional program requirements that each of the businesses are required to sign off on, that they understand. One of the key things is that the ABC has relaxed a number of their restrictions related to alcohol and alcohol consumption. And there is an allowance now through the ABC for businesses to obtain a catering permit that allows them to go beyond their physical footprint. So before, alcohol had to stop at the front door. Now it can go beyond that to a permitted location. One of the key things that's important is that there's consistency between what the city permits them to use in terms of physical space and what the ABC does in terms of their permit. And so to expedite that process and not hold any business up, we're saying you can submit both of those concurrently. The city gets a copy of the ABC catering permit, and our staff will review for consistency. Our turnaround time on sidewalk use is relatively quickly. As we look at parking space use, there are some design considerations and safety issues that need to make sure they go through review with Public Works. That includes traffic barriers and ways to ensure that people who are out in those parking spaces are safe from the traffic that flows by them. It takes a bit longer for parking space use to move through. We launched the program on Thursday. We already had some businesses that went into implementation and were able to implement things over the weekend. Some of them are relatively simple right now. So for example, in front of Portalupi, they used a wine barrel. Not sure where they got that from, but they used a wine barrel and some chairs to create that outdoor space. Kin Smoke also moved some tables and chairs out into the public realm. The winery that's on Matheson and Center, similar to that. And then the center picture on the right is Dry Creek Kitchen, where they actually reserved parking spaces for pickup. They have a pretty good pickup business, and this allows people to pull right in, get their food, and pull right out. And that is an allowable use under the Marketspace program. So that's all part of phase one. You notice we don't have pictures of use of parking spaces in Healdsburg yet. I think you'll see those start to happen in the next week or so as those businesses get permitted and they can actually move out into those street parking areas. So phase two is a little bit more complex, and we've got some images to show you how it might function, but that's use of the entire street, either a one-way road closure that opens that lane up for business, or a potentially full street closure. City Council is set to consider a full street use at their meeting on June 15th. And the goal is to have a lot of flexibility and for our staff to implement what works for different streets in town. And it also, the goal is to get enough flexibility that we can change things and modify them at a staff level if there are issues that arise or if there are opportunities that come up. Our primary focus up to this point has been the downtown business core. And this is a drawing that came from a discussion with the businesses about the feasibility of doing potentially one-way street closures in the downtown area. There are some key things that businesses have talked about. One is the ability for people to still pull up and get takeout and to-go things. That's important. Also, delivery of supplies. Some of these businesses don't have back doors, so all their deliveries come through their front door. So being able to ensure that we have delivery spots and to-go areas was important for a lot of the businesses. And again, this is just a conceptual drawing that we wanted to provide to the businesses and the community to show how this could potentially work, not saying this is what it would be. Under this drawing, this shows North Street being a one-way going east, and Center Street being a one-way going south, Matheson being a one-way going west, and Plaza Street being a one-way going east. We also wanted to look at a conceptual layout, how a street might look under a one-way or full street closure with a variety of different businesses. So we chose Center Street because it has a number of different elements. It has some retail, it has a bookstore, it has a restaurant, it has a tasting room, it has a bakery, so it has a lot of different uses on the street. And we have a firm that we've been working with, Fletcher, who was looking at some street closure options prior to COVID, and they put together some mock-ups. And I'm going to show you some mock-ups on what a one-way and full street closure could look like. These are illustrative only, and they show a lot of different configurations. In all likelihood, it wouldn't be all of these. It might be a few of these that are feasible to make happen. So this is a bird's eye view looking onto Center Street from Matheson, and this is a one-way street closure concept. One of the things that they've shown on here is the ability for delivery trucks to stop, and we designate a potential delivery zone where those trucks could stop, go out and service the businesses, and then be on their way. What they've also tried to show is a number of different configurations on how businesses could potentially expand into the street area under a relatively cost-effective approach. And I see we're getting quite a few questions. I'll pause here in just a moment, and we can get to some of those, and we can come back and look at some of these drawings as well. So this is a kind of top-down look on how businesses could potentially move out into the street. One of the things that we looked at in these drawings is how do you ensure you maintain that 6 feet of separation. So these circles on these individual business locations are actually 6 feet diameter circles. So that it shows how they could physically separate people. This is using the same mock-up of a one-way street closure, but adding a full street closure where it's much more simple on the other side. And quite likely what could happen under this model is that it would be a blend of these two. You might have some tables that intermix within businesses, and there's just a mixing of business and people and seating and things like that. One of the elements that's shown here that's not entirely correct is that there would need to be some type of emergency access through this area. So if there was an emergency, a fire or medical, emergency personnel could travel through here. We always have to provide that during special events, and it would be similar here. Those are the details that we would need to continue to work out if there is a full street closure concept that moves forward. Is how do we ensure that emergency access through a full street closure? And this is a bird's eye view looking down. Again, similar layout. You've got your businesses functioning on one side, your more public kind of open gathering area on the other. In all likelihood, it would be a mix of the two on the street as a whole. This is an example of what a business could look like. This would be a dining option. You've got a queuing line on this. You've got some tables set up. This concept proposes using the agrarian stock tanks as planters. They're also a barrier as well. Perhaps that's a way for the community to be involved in this, adopt a stock tank where members of the community maintain that. Maybe they help pay for that, but they actually help, they're part of this, so all the responsibility doesn't fall back on those businesses. Businesses are very concerned about the amount of investment that it would take to make this happen, and so we've tried to show some things that are more simple in nature and not extremely costly. This is an example of using simple folding tables and tents to make that space. This is a retail option that's shown, but it could potentially be a food option as well, where people could actually eat at these tables in the outdoor area. This is more of a parklet concept where there's a planter bed that comes in, there was some seating adjacent to it, maybe some tables. So this could potentially function as a bookstore area or a coffee shop where someone goes and gets their coffee and they have this place that they can actually go and sit and enjoy the outdoors. We're conscious of how hot the pavement gets during the summer. And so if there are options like this that move forward, it's quite likely that there would be pop-up tents or some kind of umbrellas that would be involved in something like this as well. And this is an example of what could potentially be a gallery or some art installation where there is simple dividers that go up where product can be hung from those. People can, look at that, potentially purchase those. This also shows one of the elements that will need to be incorporated, and that is a ramp to get from the curb down to the pavement. There will need to be ADA access throughout these areas. You can't expect a person in a wheelchair or someone with disability to go all the way to the end. So there are a couple of different ways to do that. They make temporary ramps that you can put in, like the yellow that's shown here. Also, some businesses have said, well, can I build a platform that reaches that curb height and gradually drops to the center of the road? And the answer is yes. There'd be some review of that, but there is that option as well. So I'm going to stop right there. We've gotten a number of questions, I think, and I'm going to turn it over to Dave. And then the second part of this is to talk a little bit about the larger kind of citywide approach that's happening throughout different parts of the country.
Hi there, and thank you, Mark. So I'm going to go through some of the questions that have come up, and then I'll tag team with Mark on that, so you're not just hearing one voice here. Nancy points out, let's calm down traffic on Healdsburg Avenue, north of Powell. Another person says this would be awesome, the overall proposal. Agreement on that. These are moving fast. Adding interim bike lanes and reducing the speed limits to 20 miles an hour. There's no reason to wait for the final plan. So I think Nancy's asking to add interim bike lanes and reduce limits to 20 miles per hour. There are state rules about how we can restrict traffic speeds, but we appreciate that suggestion. Please don't use water troughs for the gardens. So just a perspective on the barriers used, and nothing is set in stone. Nothing is set in a trough or otherwise. We are really looking at a number of options.
Hey, Dave, if I could jump in on that one really quick. We did get information from one of the council members about Avalow's grow systems, and we are definitely looking at those as a potential option as well. I mean, none of this is set.
Avalow's system is self-watering, which is nice. You don't have to rely on people being consistent during hot days. Wheeled planters, Brian suggests wheeled planters as barriers to speed access for emergency vehicles. That's a good thought. As Mark pointed out, we need to be able to move these to get an emergency vehicle inside. Debbie and Mike suggest work with CLT to provide art to enhance. That is something that's popped up. Good idea there. I know Mark thinks there's a good avenue in that. Caroline Boncha, to everyone, will there be enforcement checking on social distancing in those closed areas? Good question. So we, the city police department, we don't do wandering around proactive enforcement of social distancing. We will respond if someone complains, but generally we kind of rely on society and signage, and thankfully Healdsburg is a place where that resonates. So society and signage to peer enforce. So in any model we do, there will be adequate signage that people can point to and businesses can point to remind people that in Healdsburg we're following the rules, and you better get your mask on and you better socially distance, or you should head back to where you came from. Corinne Meadows notes, though I'm not a business owner, I always thought that a full street closure in this Center Street Plaza area is something that would enhance downtown the way the sidewalks and plazas are seen in France. Again, good comment. I'll do one more, and then Mark, you want to take some? When will it be clarified which expenses the business would incur versus the city? For instance, for example, Americans with Disability Act ramps. Good question. Again, we do hope to have some guidance on that soon. We think that it's likely that the city would be responsible for the barrier placement and the barrier maintenance. Again, talking about that water issue. And then we'll have to look at ramps. We hadn't proposed having the city take responsibility there, but that's certainly something that should be looked at. Mark, you want to take a few?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think there's only one more. This is from Gene. Says, I think it's a terrific idea. I'm wondering how the space would be allocated so all businesses can participate and potentially those not right on the square. Really good question. Participation has been a significant topic throughout the business meetings. Not every business sees value in this, particularly those that have retail that have other issues by moving the retail out into the public realm of security, of staffing, those kinds of things. And so part of what I think the success for this program will be is collaboration between businesses. Not every business wants their parking space used for this. So for example, on North Street, Taste of Tea is really interested in keeping their pickup going, and Portalupe is interested in the potential space next to it. Well, I think working collaboratively, we can look at how to make that work. Perhaps a loading zone in front of the theater, the Raven Theater, is not needed right now because there aren't shows. So can that be used for Taste of Tea? Are there ways to make this work better? So far, my impression is that all the businesses have really been talking to each other and are looking at ways they can make it work collectively. Eric and Scott with Thumbprint say, would the city possibly allow permanently tethered tables and coverings, or will businesses have to bring them in and out each day? I think the intent here is that what you set up in the public realm, aside from the sidewalks, will probably be longer term through the extent of this program. If we go into a full or half street closure, my impression is that would be available 24/7. The street would be closed throughout that entire time. So I think the answer to that is yes. The area that's a little more questionable is the sidewalks and, you know, the passability and those kinds of things for that. The downtown area changes character throughout the day. Downtown Creamery is open from 7 to 5:30. Duke's is open from 4 to 2 a.m. Outlander is open from 10 a.m. to 7. With one-way traffic plans, some parking spaces will be unused by businesses in different parts of the day. Do you plan to offer parking in the open parking spaces when businesses are not occupying them? I believe you're talking about if there's drop-off and pickup. I think the answer is yes. There are sandwich boards or A-frames that would be provided to those businesses, or signage that would go on ones that they make, and they could easily take those in and out. I think the issue you might run into is if a business opens at 4 and there's somebody parked there, how does that work? We do run into that issue with street closures and vehicles parked in areas where there are street closures, and police does a tremendous job of trying to contact that business owner before they actually go to the point of need, or the car owner before they actually go to the point of towing. One of the questions that I think Nancy brought up was this whole concept of, can we move ahead with other kinds of things like on other city streets, reducing lanes and speeds and those kinds of things. We'll talk a little bit about that process next. So other questions related to the downtown area that you have? Okay, we can always come back to it as well. Oh, there's one more. You want to take this one, Dave?
Sure. What happens when your parking space is not aligned with your storefront? So in other words, let me make sure I understand that question. Are you saying if you wanted to use a space that is not right in front of your storefront for expanded retail or tasting or something like that? What we've asked is, I'm going to assume that's the question. We're at 102 Matheson with no space up front. So if you found a space nearby that might work for you, come and talk to us. And if it's a public space, we can look at it. If it's a private space, you would want to talk with the property owner and see if you can make that work. But we are open to ideas there if you don't have a space right out in front. And then Erica and Scott are saying it's a public ADA space closest to them. Yeah, we couldn't infringe upon an ADA space unless we could effectively and quickly move that very nearby. And I would tend not to go there. So probably we want to look for a good space nearby that might work for Thumbprint. Mark, you have any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing, that we can, you know, the idea is that we work together and collectively and figure out how to make this all work. If it is relocating a handicap space across the street, that's a possibility. It's a definite possibility. We would just want to look at each individual situation and make sure we make good decisions. Okay, I'm going to bring back the presentation. So I know that one of the conversations that has been happening throughout the community, and it's actually there's been planning process underway with the Parks, River Access, and Connectivity planning process of how do we make Healdsburg a more bike-friendly, pedestrian-friendly community. So there are a lot of initiatives happening throughout the United States. The top left is the City of Austin's Slow Streets program. Charlotte, North Carolina has a Shared Streets program. Petaluma also has a Slow Streets program. And then there are other things like, as Nancy suggested, temporarily closed lanes to widen sidewalks. So I believe that this will be a follow-up discussion in two ways. One, the park planning, river access, and connectivity planning process was suspended during COVID-19. We expect to resume that in July. That's number one. That'll help kind of shape the framework for different options moving forward. Given the interest in streets, this is probably a phase 3. And again, we haven't talked about this as a city staff, but this is coming up in the community a lot. And so probably once we move through and we figure out the downtown business area, the larger discussion about other areas of the community. So this is an opportunity. We've got some great questions so far for you to give us feedback. I know not everyone is on by computer, so they're not necessarily able to type in their questions. This is an opportunity for you to tell us, what do you like? What do you not like? What other ideas do you have? And then basically anything else that you want to share with us. Dave Jans from our team is taking notes that we're compiling, so we'd love to hear additional thoughts that you have.
And if you felt like you wanted to speak, it's a okay time to do that. You could raise your hand physically so we can see you, or raise it under the participant section, or ask during the chat. And I think we have a manageable enough number where we could do that if folks would like to do that.
I don't know how to raise my hand. Can I just blast out and ask a question?
Go ahead, Kathy.
Okay, thanks. With the Healdsburg Center for the Arts on Plaza Street, which is so narrow with parking on both sides, and if you indeed have one-way traffic, would you consider having one side of the street free of parking? You know what I'm saying?
Yes, I think the answer is yes. And I think Plaza Street between Center and East Street could be one of those that could be considered for a full street closure, allowing Healdsburg Center for the Arts, I think it's Idlewild Winery, Idlewild, El Farlito. That is such a kind of magical street in town. It's got that characteristics of European. There are some accesses on that street, public access, that we would need to address, but that could potentially be one of the streets that could be considered under a full street closure, even if it's a pilot program, to see how it goes.
Great, thank you.
Anybody else want to go off mute and ask a question the old-fashioned way?
I just want to comment further on what we just talked about, but I mean, it could be possible that the street and the parking is open till, say, 4 o'clock in the afternoon or something, and then close in the evening, so restaurants or bars could then use the space. Because as somebody else noted before, not every space is used the same throughout the day, whereas retail might close late in the afternoon or early evening, and then the restaurants could use the space at night, so that there is more parking and freedom to move around the square during the daytime hours.
Certainly good possibility there. Others who want to go off mute and ask a question?
And there were a couple questions that came in also on text.
In the chat line, okay. So let's go from Erica and Scott at Thumbprint. I love the idea of closed streets around the plaza. Would love to see the 3 sides closed possibly every Sunday, but I wonder about the city creating more parking elsewhere. So that's a possibility to do it on a a sporadic basis, like 1 day a week or 2 days a week, or kind of as Gene's noting, evenings, all that's possible. We just have to work out the logistics. I wonder about the city creating more parking elsewhere. That is a factor we're looking at to make sure, either through signage or apps, we can encourage people to the right places to park if there's less parking around the plaza. There are good creative ways to do that. So we are taking that in consideration. Tom Nelson said, "This is awesome. What are the challenges you feel will need to be overcome to deploy this quickly?" So we're going to council with these ideas on Monday, and your input is very welcome there. And we'll tell you at the end how to do that. Most folks know how to do that already, but and then once we get rolling, we feel like we need a week or 10 days or maybe 2 weeks to actually put the logistics in place. So we're kind of shooting for the end of the month for something to make that work. Pia notes closing 3 sides of the plaza. on weekends would be great. Closing or partially closing center from north to mill is another thought. That is one we hadn't thought of, but yeah, interesting thought. From Mark, can we do speed limit reductions on certain streets on a temporary basis, perhaps for a few months to improve bicycle and pedestrian safety? I don't know, Larry Zimmer, are you on the line to kind of remind us how that works, if that can work? Maybe it does. I'm always skeptical about our ability to limit street speeds. Do we see Larry on here? No, Matt.
I don't see Larry.
Okay,
No.
we will ask that question, Mark McMullen. Thank you.
Yeah, you know, the idea of doing temporary street closures, like on weekends and things like that, all of those things are feasible. It comes down to resources to deploy those. And so that would be a factor if council wants to go in that direction. It is certainly more efficient to do a longer term street closure. So let's say we pick Center Street, Plaza, North Street, whatever. We can set that up once and then it remains closed and it requires less city resources to put it up and take it down. And so those are things that we have to work through on how that all functionality, how we make that work and how easy it is to deploy. Other comments? Anyone on the phone who can't type in a question? Would you like to ask any questions or provide input? Going once? Twice?
Maryland notes, let's keep Healdsburg accessible. I wouldn't like opening up street space to become an argument for instituting paid parking. Trams and shuttles are still a good idea to explore. And they are, that is a good point. We think trams and shuttles are a little bit off into phase 4 reopening. In other words, at least through Labor Day, I don't see the health officer allowing trams and shuttles. We could find something that are really breezy and open air. Maybe that may be better, but right now I see that maybe after Labor Day. So again, any other questions or comments? And then otherwise we have a little wrap up and but please don't be shy. We haven't taken the full hour.
I think these ideas are primo. I love the maps that you presented, and it opened up all sorts of ideas of what we can do to enhance the problems that we've had as businesses. So, and I think they look good. You know, I think it would be not just solving some problems with lack of business, but enhancing the look of Healdsburg. So.
Okay. Thanks, Kathy. All right, the next two slides are what happens next. So again, we've had a number of meetings with various business members, gotten a lot of input, a lot of understanding on how certain actions can affect businesses perhaps adversely. And so we're really trying to take all of this information together to formulate some kind of recommendation or plan for City Council for their meeting on Monday, June 15th. The staff report and all the information will be posted typically on the Thursday before the meeting, so it will be posted this week on the 11th. And then you can certainly read through that. You can send comments electronically at Monday's meeting, ideas that you have and things like that. Again, our hope is council gives us clear direction and a lot of flexibility to make modifications as we go and as we learn what works and perhaps more importantly, what's not working. And then make modifications to the program so it works as best as it can. I think Tom asked a question about implementation. For us to turn around from approval of council on June 1st to launching a program on June 4th. That might be record time. The next phase is a little bit more complicated and may take a little bit longer. Again, we're trying to move this forward as quickly as we can. Our contact for this, if you have any questions, is Matt Mildy. His email is on the screen. Also, if you go to cityofhealdsburg.org/marketspace, you can see the information that we presented today. You can see the information we presented to the business community. You can watch the past Zooms. We're recording and saving all of those and uploading those to that website. So all the information is there. You can also send comments directly to Matt, which he'll distribute out. If you're a business owner and you have concerns, we'll make sure that gets incorporated into the permitting process. If you're a community member, you can certainly send those comments to Matt. He'll make sure they get distributed to the team who's working on that. So that wraps up. It looks like we've got maybe 3 more questions if you want to take those, Dave.
Sure, let me get off mute there. Let's see. Corrine agreed with Marilyn about accessibility, I think. Claire O'Neill said, great ideas. Let us know how to help move this forward. And Mark just summarized those. So appreciate all of your feedback to the council. Robert said, wonderful ideas for making a more walkable city with room for pedestrians and bikes over cars, and thank you. And Carolyn said, thank you, this is a great summary. And I'll return the thanks to you folks for participating. This is really helpful to us to get a good feel for what you're interested in looking at and what you think might work for Healdsburg.
Hey, Dave, you want to mention the survey? I forgot to mention that.
Sure. So there's a survey going up that kind of reflects what we've talked about. This was in case people didn't have an opportunity to participate in the Zooms. But even if you did participate in the Zooms, you can still fill out the survey. And it's a little bit more specific about what if this block was limited to, or part of this block or all of this block was limited to pedestrians and bicyclists only, so, or for eating areas. So I think that survey goes up. I'll pause for Matt or Mark.
It'd be directly following this Zoom this afternoon.
Okay, so you'll find it on the city's website. So please, it's not a very long survey. It's pretty easy. It might take you 6 minutes.
Yeah, and Dave, I'll also email it out to everyone who's on this list. If you joined us today, I have your email, so you'll be getting an email link with the survey as well.
Great. Okay. Unless there are no more, if there are any more comments or questions, otherwise we'll let everyone get back to their lunch hour. And again, thank you for participating. This is again really helpful.
Yes, thank you.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Have a great day.